Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for holding this markup today and giving us the opportunity to advance these critical pieces of legislation, including H.R. 6, the Domestic Prosperity and Global Freedom Act, and H.R. 2689, the Energy Saving through Public-Private Partnership Act. And I'd especially like to thank both Representative Tim Ryan and our colleague Peter Welch from Vermont for the great bipartisan work that has taken place on both of these pieces of legislation. In particular, the Energy Efficiency Bill represents a great bipartisan piece of legislation that is a strong pro-environment bill, and look forward to passing both through committee today and on to the House, the full House. First, to address H.R. 6, I've said before that rarely do we get a chance to pass legislation that creates economic opportunity here in the United States, strengthens and helps out our allies abroad, weakens our enemies, and does not spend the American taxpayers' dollars. H.R. 6 accomplishes all three of these. While this committee began looking into the issue of energy exports long before the crisis in Ukraine, we can now use this legislation as a foreign policy success story and an economic success story, one which would provide jobs and growth here at home. We've held 4 hearings on LNG exports, have had a legislative hearing on H.R. 6, and a subcommittee markup. During these, many of the common misconceptions about LNG exports have been dispelled. One example is that some say since LNG exports won't begin right away, they can't do any good for quite some time. But representatives of Hungary, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic have told the Energy and Power Subcommittee that the very signal that America is serious about entering the global natural gas market will immediately address and reduce Russia's negotiating leverage and pricing power. H.R. 6 can instantly change the dynamics in that region, and the benefits will grow here at home. Some have also asserted that an extra demand from exports would cause a significant increase in domestic natural gas prices. But studies by the DOE have concluded that America has ample spare capacity in natural gas, and these studies have shown that that impact will simply not materialize. And I know that in my home state of Colorado, we stand ready to increase production. The majority of LNG export applications are waiting in a long line. We must break the logjam that is currently taking place at DOE and move toward construction of these LNG export facilities. Secretary Moniz recently hinted during his testimony before this committee that the G7 process could determine our energy policy, meaning an even longer delay before we ramp up natural gas output. I don't believe that's acceptable and shows the urgency of why we need to pass this bill. But the committee will also consider H.R. 2689, the Energy Savings through Public Partnership Act, which my partner Peter Welch and I introduced last year. The legislation has a simple focus on promoting performance contracting through the use of energy savings, creating jobs, protecting the environment, and saving the taxpayer dollars. And just in time for the Kentucky Derby, this bill hits the trifecta. It's a simple focus to make sure that we allow private companies to perform energy upgrades on federal buildings, letting them assume the risk, the cost, and receive payment only after the upgrades and the efficiencies are realized. They receive tremendous benefit for the economy, creating private sector jobs. And just look at the money that we could save the taxpayer when you think about the fact that the federal government has 3 billion square feet of office space. And so we'll be offering an amendment in nature of a substitute tomorrow that will require a report to Congress in 2015, 2016 on agency usage of performance contracts and an explanation if goals are not met. Make statutory changes to clarify the definition of a federal building and clarifies that plug loads are allowable energy conservation measure. The amendment requires a report on why life cycle cost analysis on water and energy efficiency measures that have not been implemented under DOE guidelines. This bill will create jobs, save taxpayer money, and reduce waste. I urge my colleagues to